Hello and welcome back. Now today I'm going to be showing you how to change out your ignition switch, your turn signal switch, and your steering wheel on most General Motors applications. Now for the most part, from sometime in the 60s to the early 90s, they're pretty well generically the same. There's a few differences here and there, but for the most part they're the same. And we're going to be using the 72 Nova as an example. Now in the Nova, we have two screws, one back here, one back here, that holds the center section on that you'll have to remove so we can get to the nut and pull the steering wheel off so we can get to the ignition switch. Now, not every General Motors steering wheel will be the same. Some of them will be different, but on the Nova, especially the 72, with this steering wheel, it's the way it is. Once you remove these two screws, it comes out. Let's disconnect our ground wire, and then we'll remove this nut. Now if your horn works, sometimes you're going to have to unplug the battery because it'll try to honk on you while you're messing with it. But now it comes removing the steering wheel, and you'll need a puller of some kind in order to actually pull the steering wheel off, in order to get to everything behind there. Now we're going to remove this plate with these three screws. Alright, now what we're going to do is use this locking plate compressor tool. What this is going to do is push this plate down so we can get this little ring off. So then we can remove the plate and get to the turn signal and our ignition. And basically here's the tool I'm using to compress it. Makes it really easy. So you can see it's back and enough to get the ring and pry the ring off now. Then you just carefully loosen this tool back off, because as you can tell there's spring behind it and there's pressure. So you just ease it off and then you're good. Now I'm going to try my best to show y'all this. It might be hard, but I'm using two different size screw flatheads. One that's pretty small and a medium sized one, and right about here is where the gap in the ring is. I'm going to use the corner of the flathead on one of these grooves. I'm going to try to get up under that ring. Now that I'm under the ring and the ring is starting to come out of the gap, it's going back towards the plate. Now I'm going to try to use the other screwdriver and use a twisting motion to pull it back up over the other flathead and out of that groove. Just like that. Now I hope y'all can see that. If not, I apologize. There we go. Now I'm going to slowly relieve the tension on the locking plate by loosening our compressor tool. Now then we will use that tool again to actually put this plate back on. But now we can go ahead and finish pulling this ring off. And then our plate. Alright, now I'm going to remove this for the horn. And here's everything. Turn signal and ignition's back there. Now, as you can see, this one is actually cracked right there. Now sometimes you may feel the play in here and it's not actually cracked in there. Sometimes you have to come back to this screw right here and tighten it back up and you're okay. But in this case, as you can see, it's actually cracking. So that's what's giving us a little bit of issue there. But we're going to go ahead and get that out of our way by removing this first. So we can take the lever arm out the side here. Then we can go ahead and remove 3 screws to get the rest of the turn signal out. Then we can get to our ignition switch. Now with those 3 screws loosened, actually come over here to the hazards and remove this so you can go ahead and finish pulling all that out. Now the hardest part is honestly fishing this out through there. Just have some patience and take your time. Now to actually get the lock out, there's a hole here that you have to depress this button on the ignition in order to pull it out. Now sometimes that hole is not there. What you have to do is take a screwdriver, go in there, hit it with the back of your hand and knock the hole out. That way you can access it. Now the reason why we're doing this one is because this ignition switch is falling apart. That's why we're changing it. As you can see, the end of it's already fallen off. And this hole was not there. So this is all original. No one's ever messed with it. Now once you can get that in there, we can get something to depress it. Usually you can take a screwdriver, something, start prying or pulling. Now sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder. It just depends on how long it's been in there. But there it is. Then we can just simply take our new one. Now first I am going to make sure that there is nothing left in that hole to damage our new cylinder and tumbler. And you can go ahead and add a little grease in there, or grease everything up, make sure everything's good in there, make sure it's good and clean. You don't want anything to get inside here and mess it up. And we're going to slide it back in. Now with the new ignition switch pushed in and secured, now we're going to fish our new turn signal switch down through there. Now be sure to save this old plastic piece off the old wiring harness on it, because it makes it a lot easier to fish it down through there, and then you're just going to plug it back in. Alright, now we're going to put our 3 screws back in here. Be sure to remember to screw on your hazards here, and then go ahead and put your turn signal lever on. Don't forget, because then if you do, you have to take everything back apart to this step in order to put it back on. Now once those are tightened down, be sure to put that plate back on. Then we're going to go back and put this locking plate back on with the compressor tool, and then slide the ring back on. Now the plate will only go on one way. We're going to put our lock ring right there and get it started. Going to push it up on there. And I'm just going to use 2 screwdrivers to get it started up against the plate. Alright, now I'm up against the plate. I'll slide the compressor back on. Tighten it down. Now I'm just going to tighten this compressor down until that groove shows up for the lock ring. Then I will press it in, make sure it's locked all the way around, and then we'll go ahead and loosen this back off. And we slide this plate back on. Now this one is held on by 3 small screws. So you just line those back up where it was, and you're good. Now some of the later model ones are kind of more of a press on or a pop on. So you'll just pop those back on. Now for the most part, this is where you put your steering wheel back on and tighten it back down, put the horn button back on, all that. Well, in our case, we're putting an aftermarket steering wheel on now because the old one's all cracked up and beat up. So, we will be installing an aftermarket Grant steering wheel. Now we're going to start this piece here, slide it on. Make sure your horn button sticks through, make sure it's not being bent or anything. You slide this through there. Now all that's good and lined up. Now we're going to install the new wheel itself. Now, quick note, these two pieces come with the install kit that you have to buy separately from the steering wheel. Now with our original nut here and our supplied hardware here, we're going to tighten all these down, get everything good and tight. You can use a little Loctite on them just to make sure they don't come loose. And then we'll get to the steering wheel. Alright, now on this particular Grant steering wheel, obviously we have this piece. We're going to have our horn retainer that's going to sit here. And then we'll put on the steering wheel. And then tighten it down with the Allen headed nuts that were in the steering wheel originally. Now we're just going to attach the horn wire. Try to line it up as straight as we can. Pop the horn in. Alright, now there it is. We went ahead, changed our ignition switch, turn signal switch, and our steering wheel in the 72 Nova. Now again, this process will be pretty similar on most other General Motors products. Now there may be a few differences here and there, but for the most part, all the way up till the early 90s, I believe, it should be close to the same. And hopefully this video proved helpful to you. As always, thanks for watching.